Hi all, this is Alessandro Mastroianni. Welcome back to this new series that we're doing in collaboration with Film Score and Tips, where we talk about modular synthesizers and specifically about media composers that want to get into the fantastic and crazy world of modular synthesis. Film Score and Tips is the go-to place for anyone who's interested in film music. You find tutorials, tips, advice from top industry professionals, and much more. Please head over at filmscoreandtips.com to learn more. Last time we explored one of the most basic uses of modular synthesizers for media composers, which is as an external effects unit. Specifically, we processed some vocals through it and we built a basic Kontakt instrument so that we could integrate those vocals into our workflow without any fear for revisions. Today we're going to expand on that idea and we're going to explain one of the most fundamental concepts of modular synthesis, which is voltage control. Without getting into too much details, it's worth mentioning that different modular systems use different patch cables. Throughout this series, we're gonna only be using Eurorack, which is, I'm pretty sure, the most common modular system, also known as 3U. 3U refers to 3 units, which is the actual height of the module, and Eurorack modules use 3.5 millimeters patch cables. Voltage control is used to control anything in a synthesizer. One of the basic uses is to control pitch. Eurorack synthesizers use a standard of 1 volt per octave, which means that a jump in 1 volt corresponds to a jump in 1 octave. There are different systems, for example, bookless systems use a 1.2 volts per octave, which means that it's essentially a 0.1 volt per semitone. But in Eurorack, we stick with the 1 volt per octave standard, which is widespread and very, very common. So that essentially means that if I send 3 volts first to the pitch input of a module, specifically of an oscillator, and then I send 2 volts to that same pitch input, I'll get an octave down compared to the original pitch. Voltage control is not just used to define pitch in modular synthesizers. It's used for absolutely everything, for gates, triggers, clock, and modulation, which is what we're going to use it for today. Last time we processed vocals using Monsoon, which is, if you remember, a DIY version of a very popular module by Mutable Instruments, which is Clouds. And today we're going to send it some voltage control to modulate some of its parameters so that hopefully we can inject some movement into those, at the moment, pretty static vocals. Okay, here we have dialed in more or less, because in modular synthesis, two things are never 2 times exactly the same. The sound that we dialed in last time is Monsoon, or again, Modulable Instruments, Clouds in mode 1, which is a granular processor, here with some reverb, but if you remember, we recorded it with completely dry, so we could add our own reverb in the end. Let's turn the wet knob all the way to the right, but just as a reference, this is our dry sample, unprocessed. This is already quite an interesting sound, but I think that we could do something with modulation. And what I mean with that is that we should find a way to automatically move all these knobs, so size, density, position, and texture. The way we do that is with modulation. To add modulation to our patch, we are going to need to add at least another module to our recipe. And now we are using a module called Oct by Instruo. Oct is spelled O-C-H-D. Oct are 8 analog LFOs, which are triangular, which are free running, so they're not synced to anything. And they are all related to each other. They essentially phase in and out of each other, and they're arranged from the fastest to the slowest. And I have a single ray knob, which I can also modulate itself with CV, that if as I turn it clockwise, it goes faster and faster, okay? So I send 4 of those to the 4 inputs of Mordax data, which is my oscilloscope. And I'm not sure how well you can see it, but you should be able to see it fairly well. And as I turn the knob, the ray knob higher, the fastest they go. and you have one in green, one in blue, one in red, and one in yellow. As you can tell, those are all triangular oscilloscopes. Okay, so you don't actually need this module at all for this batch. This is just for scientific purposes, so to speak, so that we can have a look at what's going on. And please remember my convention that everything red is CV and everything white is actually audio. Okay, so now I'm going to grab the 4 outputs from Modak's data, which remember, just for visualization purposes, I could grab those and map it directly here. But I'm going to grab those outputs and I'm going to patch it into these 4 main controls of Monsoon. So I'm going to go from the fastest oscillator into position, and then number 2 goes into density, number 3 goes into size, and number 4 goes into texture. And now, as you can see from the lights here, first of all, you see that they go from very fast to rather slow. And you see that in this specific module, you have a visual feedback where when it's green, it means that voltage control is between 0 and plus 5 volts, so it's positive voltage control. And when it's red, it's between 0 and minus 5 volts. So basically, all these LFOs are essentially going like this. It's sort of like our invisible hand, which is modulating the module. Let's have a listen at how it sounds. You might argue that sounds interesting, but it also sounds quite glitchy, which is going to be quite unusable in most scoring contexts. And the reason is that those LFOs are all going from minus 5 volts to plus 5 volts, which is an incredibly wide range. So they're going from the very bottom of the slider to the very top, which is way too much. And what we need to do to have this signal to behave a bit more politely, so to speak, is to attenuate it. And this is where a VCA comes in. Okay, so a VCA, and we're going to use this quote VCA by IntelliGel, stands for voltage controlled amplifiers. So what are VCAs? Essentially, VCAs alter the strength of a signal. So if you're feeding it audio, it's a way to alter its volume, or if it is CV, as we are about to do, it's a way to alter the strength of that specific CV. That means that those LFOs that we were looking at right now were basically going minus 5 volts, plus 5 volts, and so on and so forth. If I find a way of attenuating it, we are going to essentially restrict the range that they're going to be able to reach, which is something very useful because all of a sudden I have basically controls over how much those LFOs are affecting those 4 sliders that I want to modulate. And just a small clarification, the VC part of their name, voltage control amplifier, means that they can themselves be modulated, but this is a topic for a future video which will come very, very soon. Back to our patch. So what I can do now is to feed the fastest LFO into input 1 of the quote VCA, and then I'm going to set the output 1 back into our Modak's data. And now you see that I have a flat line over here. And this is because my level is at 1, my level 1 knob is at 0. If I start turning it up, all of a sudden I'm getting some signal, and I can dial it back a little bit, and now my signal is attenuated. I'm going to do exactly the same for all other LFOs. So this goes in input 2, input 3, and input 4. And I'm going to feed those 4 outputs back into the Modak's data. So again, we can see what's going on CV-wise. There you go. And now I can play with those controls, and you see that these have different levels of attenuation. And you see how smaller that the range that they're controlling is. So now I can feed those three outputs back into my Monsoon. So again, I'm controlling position is already on, so I'm controlling density with this one. And then I'm controlling size with the third one and texture with the slowest one. And now I have 4 controls that I can play with, and I'm gonna play my sound back on. I'm gonna adjust it in real time. So I'm seeing that the texture is causing a few issues when I'm modulating it, which makes sense, because if you remember, the texture is the level envelope of the grains. So if I'm modulating it, we are gonna get those glitched sounds, which is interesting but not quite what we want. So how about I'm gonna send the slowest LFOs to feedback instead, because the cool thing about modular synthesizers is that you can modulate absolutely anything you like as long as it has a patchable input. So I think this is very interesting right now. And this is a very cool variation over the first sound. So I'm gonna capture this one as well. And probably we can do something fun in Kontakt. Let's record this. Okay, let's finish this thing off. So I am back into Cubase. As you can tell, everything has been recorded. So I'm gonna call the first one granular vocals modulated, and the second one we're gonna call it granular vocals time stretched. And I'm going to export both of them at the same time. So I'm going to get into the export audio mixdown window, and I want to go on multiple, and I'm going to export these two. I'm going to use the cycle markers as export points. Let's have a quick look at the naming. So we have channel name, underscore, and cycle marker name. And then I can just click export and wait for Cubase to do its job. Okay, so I exported those samples, although I did notice that the last one that we tried, the time stretched one, had some noise in it, surely created by the artifacts. So I ran those specific set of samples through Isotope RX7 Professional. I ran a batch denoising, and I have here the denoise samples. That sounds absolutely perfect. Although I do notice that we're going to have a tiny problem with those, which we are going to sort out right away. So let's open our Kontakt, and I'm gonna make a new instrument, and I'm going to create 3 different groups, and I want to call them granular, and then the second one is gonna be the time stretched one, and then the third one is going to be granular modulated. Okay, and I'm just gonna go and map my samples. Here they are. Let's drag and drop them here, and I can go on auto map setup, and I want these to be set to single key, and I can click on apply. And last time we stretched the last octave, which I think is a good idea. Then I have the time stretched ones, and I'm gonna do exactly the same thing. I want to visualize the selected groups only, and then I can do the same. Let's just make sure. See, this is wrong. So we need these to set to single key, and I'm gonna click on apply and stretch the last octave. And then we want the modulated samples. And here they are. These are for the last group. And we want these to be set to single key. Now, if I open the wave editor, the problem that I was talking about is that this last sample that we created, the time stretched one, has a bit of silence at the beginning because of the time stretching. So we're gonna need to adjust this. This sounds very cool, by the way. And one thing that I can do is that I can do it to the last one, and then I can copy current sample start setting. Okay. So it'll be better, but you see that I'm gonna need to do some manual adjustment, which I'm not gonna do on camera. What I do want to do on camera is that we want to set up crossfading curves for this, so that we can using the mod wheel to crossfade between all these three groups. So Kontakt makes doing this actually very easy. You want to make sure you're on the first group and you have group solo selected, so that now if you play, you're only playing the selected group. If you don't have these on, you're triggering all the three groups at the same time, which is not what you want. So let's go back to group solo. And now in the group you find the volume, you right click on it and you want to modulate it through an external source, which in our case is MIDI CC. Here is the MIDI CC number that you want to use for the modulation, and we want to use modwheel, which is CC number 1, so that is good. And now let me put my aerial cam on for a second. You'll see that this is my modwheel, and if I have my modwheel all the way down, I can't hear anything until I start raising it. However, we kind of want the opposite to happen. We want our sound to be on only when our mod wheel is down, because we want to crossfade it. So you can click on the table, you can make it active, and I'm actually going to create different crossfading curves. You add a notch by right clicking on the curve. So you want to do something like this. And I hope it's clear why I'm doing this, because I want to create a crossfade between the different groups. So I'm gonna do exactly the same on my third group. So for the third one, I want to do something like this, for example. I think something like this could work. And same thing for the third and last group. Make it active. I feel this should work kind of okay. So we get rid of group solo. So now we are in the time stretched one, and here in the modulated group. We're gonna need to adjust those curves a little bit, but what I want to do is to use the replica delay in diffusion mode as I showed you before. We can add some modulation. I think this is really cool. We made our own very expressive instrument, and there is only one thing that is left to do, which is making some loops for these samples. The reason is that if I, for example, play any sample, this one for example, it will only last up until 12 seconds or however it is, and if I keep the key pressed down for longer than that, it's gonna run out of sample, so to speak. Now, so the way you do this is simply by clicking on one of the loop zones, and you can make it maybe this long or something like that, and you can do some crossfading, which will help. And let's see how it sounds now. There, it looped just fine, so I can do what I was trying to do before now. So I can go here and tool selected zones, copy current zones loop setting. Okay, and now all the zones should be looped, and now I'm sure that I'm gonna need to play it a little bit and do some adjustments, and I'm gonna need to do the same for all the other loops. But this is pretty much it. I want to then save my instrument, and I'm gonna save edited instrument as we're gonna call it granular vocals for now, and you want to save it as patch plus samples, and you don't want to compress samples for now. You can save it. It's doing its work, and now you have your very own virtual instrument. And by the way, I'm gonna make a more complicated instrument for this, and we're going to release it for free at Sonora Cinematic. Okay, we're going to close it here. Hopefully what this video made clear is that processing your sounds in unique ways is definitely one of the paths to making your music sound unique and stand out from all the noise. And using a modular synthesizer for that can be really an endless source of inspiration. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.